Good afternoon, everybody. It's always a great pleasure, a deep pleasure for me to have an opportunity to return to Jerusalem. My first experience here was in 1970, that's a very long time ago, when I was a visiting professor. An experience that I continue to remember with great pleasure and satisfaction. I met a few minutes ago my friend from those days, Professor Gutfreund, who was president of the Hebrew University, a distinguished president of the Hebrew University fairly recently. I've come back to Israel numerous times, regularly, and had a very inspirational relationship with most of the universities of this country. I've also had a number of young people from these universities work with me. Several of them have made excellent careers since then, some of them here in Israel, some of them abroad. The subject of my presentation is worldwide energy perspective. I was very pleased to note that the theme of this entire week or weeks-long event is Israel and the world. A little later in this meeting, I will speak about an intermediate scale, namely Israel and the Middle East. We heard earlier at this meeting the important role that Israel plays on the world scene. But I'd like to convey to you here this afternoon that in fact every single one of us has a very important role to play in the decades to come, particularly in the field or in the general area of energy and the very closely linked area of climate change. As a physicist and a chemist, I have worked most of my life on rather abstract mathematical theories, for one of which, as you heard, I was awarded the Nobel Prize. But in the last few years, I found it more appropriate for me to turn my attention to the energy climate problem. And I'd like to tell you some of my thoughts about this. Before looking at graphs and looking at specifics, let me remark, we've heard a great deal about globalization already, and energy and climate are perhaps as important examples of globalization as one can find. You can say, I don't believe in globalization. But you don't have to believe in globalization to experience climate change. In fact, you cannot avoid globalization when it comes to climate change. When carbon dioxide is put up into the atmosphere in China, the people here in Israel and people in my present homeland for the last half century, the United States, are affected by it as much as the people in China or in Timbuktu. The climate globalizes us, whether we like it or not. And every one of us has a responsibility and an opportunity to participate in globalization. So I will emphasize energy today, but climate is closely linked to it. Here are two graphs. The details are not really very important. It gives you just, by looking at these so-called pie charts, you can at a glance get the general idea of the situation we find ourselves in. Left and right here refer to total energy consumption and electrical energy consumption. And you can see right away the biggest piece of the pie on each of the charts is the light blue slice in the upper right-hand corner, and it's coal. And coal has been with us for quite a long time, not by historical standards, but several hundred years. It constitutes, on both of these charts, approximately 1/3 of the total energy. Now, coal is perhaps the major producer of greenhouse gases in the upper atmosphere. We have an ample supply that is depending on future history, which is not predictable, but it's in any case several hundred years. But unfortunately, every piece of coal that we find and burn and obtain energy from ends up as carbon dioxide in the upper atmosphere, where it stays something like 100 years. So you can't say in 20 years we're going to introduce new policies and we'll fix everything. That carbon dioxide is up there for your children and your grandchildren. And please think of it that way. Now, everybody, even my government now, and you'll hear from President Bush later in his meeting, everybody now speaks about renewable energies. But many people really question whether that's for real. Everybody knows that oil is for real. Everybody knows that coal is for real. But what about these renewable energies? So there's quite a bit of material here. I'll just summarize it for you in 2 or 3 sentences. It addresses the question whether these renewable energies are as real as coal and oil. Sunlight is the first item on this list. And you see here numbers and units that are not very familiar. But look at the text underneath. 1% of the land area, of the Earth's land area, receives a certain amount of solar energy per year. And if we assume that this can be harnessed at 10% efficiency, and that's sort of a realistic order of magnitude, that yields about solar energy alone at 10% efficiency over 1% of the land area, a tiny fraction of the land area, it's probably a little more than the size of Israel, but not hugely more, produces about twice the total rate of energy use in 2005. And it's not that different today. So it's a huge source of energy. Please keep that in mind. That will eventually be the main source of energy for your children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and mine. Next, wind. There is, of course, energy in wind. Sometimes it becomes catastrophic. Everybody knows about that. Quantifying how much energy is there shows that it is also a very substantial source of energy, although much, much less than direct solar energy. Biomass has appeared in the global discussion of energy relatively recently, 5 or 10 years ago, and was first greeted with enormous enthusiasm, justified, but perhaps in a more modest scale, because making solar energy from biomass, whatever that is, plants, trees, garbage, competes very severely with two other essential harvests from the earth, one other essential harvest from the earth, namely food, and the other an essential necessity for life, water. So here are your main, look forward the next 100 or 200 years, those are the main sources of energy. I'll finish. So this is a specific example which I will skip. This deals with photovoltaics. And here's something that refers to everybody, namely, my country and yours use much more energy than you need and much more energy than you should use. And reducing it by an amount or by a fraction that will not hurt you at all, or me, will make a huge difference. I'm talking about eventual reduction of the use of energy by a factor of about 2 or 50%. Science can contribute to this effective conservation of energy as well. That's more my job and the job of those among you who are scientists. Next, please. Now, you can take that off. I've finished my presentation to you. I want to mention that I will make another presentation later on in this meeting on the new Middle East. And that's very much tied up with the same subject. If you're interested, look at your program. It's taking place this afternoon. Thank you very much.